Hello and welcome to the biology of trauma and how to manage it in the classroom.
My name is Dr. Crystal McCabe. I am a full professor here with Grand Canyon University in the College of Education. Looking at my background here, I have a doctorate in industrial and organizational psychology, 2 master's degrees, one in special education and one in professional counseling, and a bachelor's degree in psychology. You put that all together and you get a person who just really, truly, truly loves diving in and getting just really understanding behavior and just classroom management and all of those pieces when it comes to our kiddos in the K-12 setting. 16 years of experience working in the field of special education. I started out as a resource teacher, became fully trained in that co-teaching model, those push-in situations going in. I co-taught math, reading, and writing. Then I moved to self-contained, where I worked with students who had been removed from their home schools due to their behavior. And that was probably my most favorite. I know it sounds incredibly weird, but those kiddos with those challenging behaviors are my absolute favorite kiddos to work with. After that point, I moved up to Grand Canyon University, where I have been working with students who are going in to become special education teachers, as well as students just getting started in their education programs. And I have been with the university for the past 9 years. In my free time, I'm also a licensed associate counselor, where I have a caseload of about 20 to 25 clients that I maintain, and I see from ages like 3 to the elderly, individuals, couples, families, the whole spectrum. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, and I've got 2 fur babies.
My name is Associate Professor Kimber Underdown. I'm also in the College of Education at GCU. I have a master's degree in teaching. I'm all but dissertation in my doctoral degree. Won't ever finish it though. That's a whole other story, a whole other 90-minute presentation. Bachelor's degree, I have a bachelor's degree in special education. I'm currently getting a second master's degree in professional counseling. And I have almost 31 years, almost to the day. I guess in August, I will have 31 years teaching overall. I have 21 years teaching preschool through 12th grade, special education courses at both private and public schools. I started out as a special education preschool teacher, and then my first and second year were in special education preschool, and then I went to a private school for students who had been kicked out of their public schools for behavioral concerns. And I taught 7th, 8th, and 9th grade for a couple of years there. And then I kind of went to self-contained within schools, and then resource, and then I was a co-teacher, and then I was a lead, and then I ended up my career in the public and private school system, teaching 9th through 12th graders who had significant behavioral and learning needs. And fun fact, Crystal and I started at GCU on the exact same day. We were the only 2 people who started that day, and that was 9 years ago. I've also been an adjunct for GCU for about 4 years prior to becoming full-time at GCU. My favorite students also are the ones with behaviors, and I keep in touch with a lot of my old students via Facebook or whatever, or with their parents, and it's really fun to see how they've come a long way from how they were. And I'm just really excited to share all of that with all of my students that I have at GCU, and I teach master's degree students who are getting their master's degree in special education.
So we chose this quote because we thought it was very fitting for the topic that we're going to be discussing today. So when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. So some deep thoughts to get us started. Moving into the agenda.
What is trauma? What does trauma do to the brain and body? How can teachers help themselves and their students overcome fear and anxiety in the classroom? And how can teachers increase rigor, relevance, and relationships in their classrooms?
So before we get started into the content, why don't we go ahead and use one of those strategies that we're going to teach you today. So this first strategy is strike a pose. So you may know, or maybe you don't know, but your body language can absolutely change your mood and behavior. And so studies have shown that simply arranging the body in certain poses can create feelings that are consistent with those postures. So let's start here with our Superman pose. So we're going to stand up, and I'm going to stay sitting so that you can keep seeing me on this video, but you can stand up where you are, and you're going to kind of be aware of how you're feeling right now. Kind of come up with maybe 2 to 3 adjectives for how you're feeling. Maybe you're excited, like I know I'm excited to be presenting to you right now. Maybe you're tired, maybe you're irritable, frustrated, feeling a little anxious or stressed. Maybe you are excited and happy, whatever it happens to be, but kind of describe the feelings that you're having right now. As you're standing there, go ahead and spread your legs shoulder width apart. Lift your chest and your head, and you're going to put your hands on your hips with your elbows pointed out. Bring a look of self-assurance and possibility to your face. This is the Superman pose. Hold this pose for a few breaths and notice any changes in your emotions. How do you feel different? Now, with your legs in the same position, stretch those arms upward at 45-degree angles. You're going to spread those fingers out really, really wide. See how much space you can get between them. Make a facial expression full of brightness. This is the star pose. We're going to hold this pose for a few breaths and see how you feel now. If you look at Kimber's face, she is the epitome of brightness. Now, these types of exercises you could do anywhere. You could totally stand in front of your classroom and have your students do this to get the day started. We want them to feel like a superhero. Maybe it's before a test and we want to give them that self-assurance. You could have them do that Superman pose. You can have them reach for the sky in that star pose. Any way you want, but helping them to realize that their body language can actually affect their mood as well.
So what is trauma? We're going to transition into the piece on trauma. Trauma is any type of distressing event or experience that can impact your ability to cope and function. It can be trauma, whatever it is, whether it is physical trauma or an emotional trauma or whatever, it can result in both emotional, or not just both, but emotional, physical, and psychological harm. So that's important to remember. And trauma that happens to anybody, any person, can result in these things.
So we're going to take a look here. Most of the time, people associate, when we just start discussing trauma, we associate it with ACEs, or the adverse childhood experiences. This is probably words you've heard before. This was a study done, and this is, basically what they had found, these different adverse childhood experiences. And what they found is that this large percentage of people, more than half, had actually experienced at least one of these types of traumas in their childhood. And so if you kind of look over the different experiences that are listed here, you can kind of see maternal depression, emotional and sexual abuse, substance abuse, domestic violence, physical and emotional neglect, mental illness, divorce, incarceration, homelessness. So you have those things taking place. And when you think about that maternal depression as well, you can take that even further to while the mother's pregnant, and any trauma that the mother might have been experiencing, depression or anxiety while they're pregnant, can even be having that impact on the child. And then you have the adverse community environments too. And so this picture was really neat to be able to kind of reflect these different experiences. But people experience poverty or discrimination, community disruption, lack of opportunity, economic mobility, social capital, quality and affordability and poor housing, violence. You think about just the past 2 years and having the experience that we did with the pandemic. That is something now that is an adverse community environment experience that everyone has faced. And so when they did this study, they were really looking at how many had experienced even just one of these experiences. And what they found is that many of them experienced not just one, but more than one. And then the impact that that has had on their life.
So your brain reacts to trauma in specific ways. Neurologists and uh, biologists and lots of physicians have done studies on how it actually affects the brain. So early trauma can lead to a higher incidence of things like depression, anxiety, mood disorders, which can be a variety of things. Um, and then your physical body can have a incidence of certain metabolic and cardiovascular diseases. So this is kind of crazy when you think about it, that all of these early childhood adverse events can really have an impact on your physical well-being as an adult. So all these years later, and that makes trauma a public health risk. Just like the pandemic was a public health risk, the trauma of things that are happening to children that are in our care is a public health risk for the future.
Continuing on with that trauma in the brain, we really wanted to kind of showcase and be able to show you some of those things that are truly taking place in the brain. So if you look at that image there, it's showing you a brain scan of a healthy 3-year-old, and then you can see the scan next to it, which is a 3-year-old who's had severe neglect. Look at some of the differences that you can see in those two images. I mean, something that stands out immediately to me is the size itself and what's taking place there. So if you look there from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, you can kind of see that young children who experience trauma are at particular risk because their rapidly developing brains are very vulnerable. Early childhood trauma has been associated with reduced size of the brain cortex. This area is responsible for many complex functions, including memory, attention, perceptual awareness, thinking, language, and consciousness. These changes may affect IQ and the ability to regulate emotions, and the child may become more fearful and may not feel as safe or as protected. Think about some of those words you heard in there, some of the areas that this is affecting: memory, attention, thinking, language. And think about our jobs as teachers and how much this is greatly impacting our students' ability to actually function properly in a classroom and learn.
And to go one step further too, with that brain having been so much smaller, and you can see the darkened areas that are not working as well, what do you think that effect might have on that person as they become an adult, and possibly getting some of the things that we see with older adults with dementia and things like that? Just, thinking about the big picture, we're not just looking at children for the here and now. When children are in our care, it's for their potential for the future.
So moving towards what some of those things that our students are experiencing when they've had trauma, and I'm sure that you're going to hear some of these and it's kind of like, oh, absolutely, I know I've had students that have experienced this. You yourself may have experienced some of these effects of trauma, but sleep disturbances, headaches, oversensitivity to touch and sound, inability to focus, easily distracted, low self-esteem, hard time making friends, extreme emotional dysregulation, loss of concept of safety or direction, difficulty in detecting or responding appropriately to danger cues. So there's that fight, flight, or freeze, self-harm, temper tantrums, nightmares, attention-seeking behavior. Now, if you were to look at that list and I didn't have the title on there about trauma in the brain, maybe there's some things that start to come to mind. If you started having students who started displaying some of these things, for example, if there was just a student in your class who started having all this attention-seeking behavior, hard time focusing, things like that, you might quickly start to think that that student might have ADHD or something like that. And this is where there's also misdiagnosis that takes place with these students, when in reality, there was actually, this trauma that had been experienced, but the students can articulate that. And you think about a student who maybe experienced it in the womb. they don't know. They're not going to be able to tell you that this took place and happened to them. And so they're going to be displaying with these behaviors. And, it's our job to be able to work with them. And it doesn't necessarily mean we have to find what that trauma was and have them relive it and tell it to us, or that we have to know exactly what that trauma was, or that we have to diagnose these things. It's more about being aware that these are some of the behaviors that can be taking place. And as I tell my future teachers that I'm working with now, it used to be one of those situations probably in the past where you might have a kid in the classroom who's experienced trauma. But I prepare my future teachers now with expect that every child in that classroom's had trauma. Because again, they're not going to come in with a label on their shirt that says, "Hi, my name is, and I have had trauma." So we don't know, we're not going to easily be able to pick them out from a crowd. And so just that assumption that all of our students, and especially now that we've lived through a pandemic, all of our students have experienced an adverse environment situation. And so really kind of having that in the back of our head that instead of thinking about, when we're thinking about what the behavior is trying to communicate to us, realizing that this may be something that's happened to them. So share what you think. Take a moment, you can pause the video. If you have someone with you, you can talk about it, or maybe you want to write down some of your thoughts yourself. But why do you think early trauma causes permanent changes in the biology and physiology of people? And also share your thoughts on why it's important to know about these biological changes.
So this quote I thought was really great because it really shows that us as teachers, we can being trauma informed can help us change the message from what is wrong with you to what happened to you. So we can really get to listening, focusing on the children and knowing that their behaviors are not because they want to misbehave, they're because something has happened and we can treat them more with care and less with judgment.
So how do students with trauma, how they might behave? So kind of looking over these 3 different boxes here. Due to that high cortisol level that's happening from those adverse events, the students may feel more on edge all of the time. When we think about it, I know, most people have seen that whole hand brain situation and the flipping of the lid. What that really is showing is that that's staying in that heightened sense of fight or flight. It is always constantly examining my surroundings and asking myself, am I safe? And so students in these situations when they've experienced trauma have a really hard time being able to come down from that, being able to go into that parasympathetic nervous system and be able to actually relax. So they're constantly on edge wondering like, am I okay? What's going to happen next? Am I safe? Students may be hypervigilant, anxious, fearful, antisocial, or aggressive as a response to those events. They may even perceive something that most would consider neutral or, not a threat. And it may increase their anxiety and aggression. And that's the thing, because we didn't experience that with them. We weren't there. We're not aware of the situations. It can be hard for us as teachers to know what could be triggering or what could be, this stimuli that might cause them, to have that increased anxiety or aggression towards it. Vicarious trauma. You might have heard about this, or you might have heard it called second-degree trauma. But us as teachers, we actually experience this as well. And so this quote here, I think it's kind of funny because, they don't really tell you, like they tell you in your classes as you're preparing to be a teacher, you get all these lessons and how to write a lesson plan and how to teach kids to read or how to do the math and how to really dive into that curriculum and write those lesson plans. And then we learn about that classroom management, how to organize that classroom and where to seat the kids and things like that. But as this teacher wrote in this quote, I was blindsided by the emotional aspect of teaching. I didn't know how to handle it. And that's the part that maybe we're not as prepared for. What am I supposed to do when my students in front of me have experienced these different types of traumas in their life. And we take that home with us as teachers. We're human, we can't shut our humanity off and become these cold robots. We're just not robots. And we go into this helping profession because we have a specific type of heart, for wanting to help other people. And so we can't shut that off. We are going to fully absorb what has happened and the experiences that our students have had to them. And so that vicarious trauma, it affects our brains as well as teachers in much the same way that it affects our students. You can kind of see there, the brain emits a fear response, just like we were talking about before with that fight or flight. It releases that excessive cortisol and added adrenaline, increases that heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, release of and flood of emotions. So this biological response can manifest in mental and physical symptoms such as anger, headaches, workplace behaviors like missing meetings, lateness, avoiding certain students. That's what the experts are saying about this vicarious trauma that we can experience as teachers. And so that is why it is so important that we don't learn just how to help our students, but also be able to help ourselves as teachers. When we talk about teacher self-care and how important it is, and we keep hearing it, and it's buzzwords for everybody like, oh, make sure your teachers are taking time to do self-care. Those are great to say, but sometimes we just don't know how. How do I fit this in? How do I fit this into this jam-packed day already in my life? Like, I'm not sure how this is going to work. Or, we're not even sure really what self-care even means. Maybe we haven't even had the chance to kind of figure out what that means for us. So some of those strategies that you can do, one of the ones that, the experts had recommended, and I really thought that this was kind of cool. It's really reflecting, mapping out your workday, thinking about your entire school day from start to finish. And maybe one day you set timers on your phone just to be able to kind of check in and write like how things are going and what you're doing at these different times of day. I know they have us do these sometimes to see where our performance peaks are and when we're really, really like energetic and good at our job type of thing. But they want you to kind of map out your emotions and what you're feeling and where your most stressful times of the day take place. And so when you know that, when you're aware, then you can plan for that. And so you might throw in some meditation or mindfulness or some breathing techniques and things like that in preparation that that time of the day is going to be more stressful for you. Counting to 5, pretty simple things. Visualizing a calming place. I included a photo here. This is Big Bear, California. It is my calming place. It's my happy place. And I was just there recently. And so I took this photo and I kind of included it there because you find yours. Visualize your calming place. Maybe it's a place that you've been. Maybe it's a place you want to go. Maybe it's a place you've completely created inside of your head. Maybe you want to draw it. These are also things that you can do with your students. I mean, taking the time to count to 5, I used to stand in front of that classroom and I'd take some deep breaths and the students would all look at me and I'd say, Mrs. McCabe's feeling a little bit anxious right now. Anybody want to take some deep breaths with me? And of course, they all wanted to do that. Of course, they probably all needed to do that as well. And so taking that time, because as I'm doing this for myself, I'm helping them as well, and I'm giving them tools. And this last bullet here, respond opposite to how you feel. So inside, you might feel like I want to yell and scream. I want to just start shouting at this student. But instead, I'm going to be very quiet. Maybe I even start to whisper. I'm going to do the opposite of how I'm feeling. And so those are just a handful of strategies that you could start using to help yourself through that secondhand trauma that you're experiencing as well. So in this here, this is called the window of tolerance. And so you can kind of see on that scale there, we have the hyperarousal section, we have this window of tolerance, and then we have the hypoarousal. And you can see what's taking place in these different parts. In that hyperarousal, we have that increased heart rate, hypervigilant, feeling anxious, reactive, and defensive. Then we have this window of tolerance in the yellow, which is our normal heart rate. We're alert and relaxed. We're calm, curious, open to experiences. And then in the hypoarousal, that's kind of that freeze stage, right? It's where we're low energy, decreased heart rate, feeling withdrawn, numb, or depressed. Kind of think about where you are right now on that scale. And I know if you're feeling tired, you might feel like maybe you're in that hypoarousal place, but, and that's okay too. Think about a time maybe when you've been in that hyper arousal place. Maybe it was an experience that took place at your school, fire drills, students start having a fist fight, things like that, where you have that increased heart rate moment take place. Or think about a time maybe when you've been in that freeze stage. The whole idea behind it is we know when we feel in that window of tolerance. And so we want to be able to stay there. That's where we perform optimally, and that's where we want to be. We want to stay there. And so since you can think about the times that you've been in that hyper or that hypoarousal phase, you know that you have actually gotten yourself back to that window of tolerance. So maybe think about some things that you do to bring yourself back to that place, back to the window of tolerance. And those are the types of strategies that you want to focus on, because those are the strategies that work for you. Those might also be the kind that you want to share with your students to help them get back to their window of tolerance. But these are conversations that you can have with your students, and you can actually teach them a language so that there's a common language about it, where they'd be able to even share and express to you how they're feeling, or maybe like on the thermometer, like I'm getting out of my window of tolerance. Okay, so what do we need to do to get you back there? Do we need to take some breaths together, do these different activities?
And ways to help in your classroom is going to be the next focus. We're going to focus on these particular 5 things. So we're going to focus on finding a common language, reframing disruptive behavior, teaching self-regulation, building relationships, and increasing the rigor and relevance of content. So these are going to be the next 5 really big areas that we're going to focus on, and each area is going to actually help you with your students in your classroom. And here's a really good quote over here on the left. When little people are overwhelmed with big emotions, it's our job to share our calm, not join their chaos. It's really easy to join the chaos when you have a bunch of heightened little ones, or even big ones, especially the big ones sometimes. When you have students that are coming in with a lot of chaos, it's easy to feel that yourself. But our job is to remain the calm and bring in the calm. Not that we're not going to have those times of chaos, but you have those past strategies that Crystal shared that can help you reframe it for yourself so that you can help the students. But just keep that in mind. We want to share the calm, not join the chaos. It's really easy to do. It's really easy to do in just life, with your coworkers too. So just try to keep that in mind.
So to start with finding that common language, even when I was saying that about teaching the students some of those terminology and things like that, so they can be really good advocates for themselves. Behaviors are a consequence of the biology behind that trauma. So everyone at the school starts to have a common goal, and students are not blamed or shamed for their trauma. We want to be able to actually have these, this language that everybody knows and is aware of, and be able to actually use it. And again, that really truly helps them to be able to advocate for themselves, because just like Kimber mentioned at the very beginning, we have these students for this moment, but they're going to become adults, and we're prepping them for that as well. So alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much.
So the next step is to reframe a disruptive behavior. And often, we really think students just don't want to behave. They're not motivated to behave. They're not motivated to, focus in the classroom. Maybe we're really quick to diagnose kids with ADHD, or, they're so hyper. There's things that we all have said, all of us. I don't care if you are like the number 1 teacher in the world. You've had either these thoughts or these, you've said it, your coworkers in the work, teacher room, where you have said these things that, the students just, they won't do what I say, they won't learn. they're just so defiant. Little Donnie is so defiant. And oh my gosh, you know what? I just can't get over how lazy Jane is. Do you have Jane in class? Man, she is so lazy. She just doesn't do anything. And so sometimes you have to look at and reframe the behavior. Kids will do well if they can, not if they want to. Okay. Kids want to do well, just like we want to do well in our jobs every day. We want to do well. But sometimes you run into things where you just can't. And, I like how it says you can't yet. That doesn't mean these kids aren't ever going to be able to, show appropriate classroom behaviors and learn and all of that. It means they just haven't mastered it yet. And that's okay. We can help. So you need to understand that behaviors are just attempts to adapt trauma and stress. They may have these behaviors at home because it keeps them safe. So when they come to school, they don't know that you're going to keep them safe and that they don't have to have those behaviors. Kids can't just flip between situations the way that adults can. And the reason that we as adults can is because we've learned it. It's not because we're better than children. It's that we have the experience and we have learned certain situations you do need to be more heightened and be aware. If you are walking around in Baltimore at night, you should probably be a little aware that what is going on around you, and just be looking for safety. Or downtown Phoenix, Crystal and I've been in both in these situations where you just kind of are a little heightened because you need to be. But then when you're at work or when you're eating lunch, you don't have to have that same sense of, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? But we've learned that. So what we want to do in the classroom is identify and reduce stressors, show students they can trust us by being trustworthy, not just saying you can trust me and then not showing that trustworthy behavior. We really have to show it and mean it. And then teaching the skills necessary to overcome the stressors. And if you look at this photo too, or this little chart, you'll see that when we think kids just won't do things, we're really judgmental towards their behavior. When we think they can't do it, we're a little more curious. Why can't they do it? What can I do to help them? And so then if you look at the view of the child, instead of looking at them as willful or defiant, we may look at them as having skill deficits, or there's just too much stress going on in their lives. And then our thinking, so-and-so's lazy, we can think, what's getting in the way? What can I do to help? And then in the won't, sometimes our response is rewards and punishments, but that doesn't always work. If a student doesn't have a skill, we can punish them all we want, but that's not going to change the fact that they still don't have that skill. They haven't learned it. So, it's like punishing a kindergartner for not being able to do algebra. It doesn't make any sense. It's not going to make them do algebra. So you have to teach the skill and find and remove the barriers. And then the child's experience, if we think they won't do it, they're frustrated. They feel shame. Sometimes they feel guilty they're holding up the whole class, or they feel like really have a low self-esteem because their teacher doesn't like them, because they think you don't like them if you're judging them all the time. But when we just kind of shift that mindset to they can't do it yet, the student feels supported and strengthened. So we just need to find their stressors and reduce them, find any unmet need that they have and meet it, whether that is they aren't getting enough food during the day and we can provide them a breakfast in the morning, or it is some other need that they need met, and then find those skill deficits and teach them. And I'm not just talking about academic deficits, I'm talking about actual behavioral deficits, skills that they need to learn in to get along in a classroom as well as society in the future, because once again, my focus is always on these students are the future. We need to look at what we can do to help them be successful adults, and not just successful like financially, but successful in that they get along well in society, they feel fulfilled. And I think that's our job, whether we have preschoolers or 12th graders.
So the next area is to teach self-regulation. So when we're teaching self-regulation, some of those things we want to make sure that we're doing is that we have clear expectations. Going back to what Kimber was saying, they may be lacking the skill. We need to make sure we're defining things. I can't have an expectation for my students and maybe it changes every day, or they're not sure, or maybe the way I react to whether or not they meet that expectation changes daily. We want that consistency. So we want to make sure that the expectations we're having in that classroom are clear. We've practiced them. The students know what's expected of them. You model and practice behaviors. This is really fun sometimes for the students. I know my students always loved because I'd have them say, what does it look like? And have them show me what it looks like. Now, can somebody be, the volunteer to show me what it doesn't look like? And boy, did they love to show you what it didn't look like, what you're not supposed to do when you're walking down the hallway. So have them model and practice those behaviors and do it often. Don't just do it that first week of class. You want to be able to do those things several times throughout the year. I know it was always good to do it, after breaks, but it's also really good to do it, when there's a new student that comes into the classroom and stuff, because that can be a big disruption, and it's not fair again to that student because that student didn't have that time taken to be able to learn those expectations. Give the students a chance to reflect on things, what we want them to do. We've practiced how to do it. Let the student have time to reflect. And then get their feedback. Ask them to be part of it. I know we always tell our future teachers that, when you're creating those classroom rules and expectations, have the students be a part of it. You want them to have that buy-in. If they're helping to set the rules, then they're more likely to follow them because they have that buy-in into what's expected of them. So some of these things over here on the right then are just some examples of things that you can do. So when you're having a situation in the classroom and stuff, or you're feeling a certain way as the teacher, relax before you respond. Take that calming breath before responding to the student. Regulate yourself. Again, we go back to that quote about not getting into their chaos, right? We want them to be part of our calm and not become part of their chaos. And so we need to get them over to our side. So we ourselves have to reflect that calm as well. Take that deep cleansing breath. Respond with that calm voice. It says here, speak like a broken record. I don't know. I think I'd probably start laughing if I tried to do that. But
I
remember that
used
it's
to do that a lot
calm
and
and
it worked
slow.
really well.
Is that, can you share with us, Kimber, what that sounds like or what that looks
Yes.
like?
So when I taught students who had significant behavior concerns, if you are giving them perhaps a choice between two things and they are escalating, you just would say the choice over and over again. So it would be like, you can join us right now at the table, or you're going to have to go, let me make up something, go out into the hallway until you're ready to join us. And they will keep escalating, keep escalating, keep escalating. And you just have to keep saying it. You're going to have to, your choice is to come join us or go into the hallway until you are calm. And then you just keep saying it. And it's either going to annoy them to the point where they're just going to do it, or they really are starting to calm down and listen. Oh, she gave me two choices. I can do one of these. So it isn't really supposed to annoy them, but it can annoy the students enough that they're like, okay, she's really not going to budge. I want to go, I want to go to recess, or I want to go to the bathroom for the 15th time today. And she's asking me to come join the class or go stand outside. And those are the only two options. And then obviously if they make a choice that isn't one of those two options, then you kind of have to guide, from there. Well, your two choices were these, you're making that choice. So now I have to make the choice for you. So, but the broken record, it really does work if you just say it enough times, because they're not really listening the first when they're in an escalated setting any more than you may be listening to somebody that when you're in an escalated setting. And that there's a reason why when there's a fire alarm or something, it keeps going on, because at first you may not realize what's happening, and so there's a reason why, because we get all stressed out and we're like, I don't know how to react. But if you're given the directions over and over again, then you're kind of like, okay, all right, I can figure this out. So that's what
Walk
that's all about.
calmly outside of the burning building. Walk calmly outside of the
Yes.
burning building.
And sometimes there are things like that you hear on overhead
Mhm.
speakers, and you're like, okay, that's the reason, because it really does, it does help you to figure out what you're supposed to do. There's a reason why when you get on a plane, they tell you every single time what the expectations are should something happen. And so the broken record is kind of like that.
And that next bullet there, it kind of gives you that feeling of being that referee or the umpire in a game, type of thing. So if a rule is broken, avoid raising your voice or exhibiting any emotion. You're going to stay neutral and calm. Say something like, since you broke the rule, this is what you will do. Again, that referee who simply states the consequence and holds the player accountable. This is really important because when we think about relationships and stuff, this is huge about helping to restore that relationship with the student after it's over. If we get too emotional in the situation or we raise our voice, it's going to be a lot harder to repair that relationship and restore that relationship with the student. So we want to just completely stay neutral in that moment, keep our voice, level, not elevating it or anything like that, and just state the facts. You can use a timer. That's another a tool that you could use. Use a timer to allow students to express themselves and then return back to class. I'm going to give you this time. We had a variety of timers in my classroom, and it was cool because they were the sand ones, and they went from like 30 seconds up to 5 minutes, and they had all the different increments. And so I could say, you know what, okay, you have until the sand goes down, especially if they were younger, they couldn't tell time themselves, or, it's really hard for them to really estimate how much time has passed in those situations. And so I could put that, and it was something visual that they could look at. And now you can return back to the classroom, get yourself together, express your emotions, whatever you need to do in this moment. But when the sand comes down, you're going to come back into the class. So what does this mean for me, like you as a teacher? So take some time to think about, what is one way that you self-regulate? Something that you do for yourself to help you self-regulate. And what is one way you can teach self-regulation to your students? All right, so we're going to move into another strategy, because you've been sitting for a long time. And so have your students usually by midday. We're going to call this the mid-presentation reset, but this is like a midday reset. What is the saying? If the butt is numb, so is the brain. I believe I heard many professors say that, but we want to make sure that we're giving those students a chance to kind of reset and get back on track. It's not good for our bodies. Our bodies are not designed to sit as much as we do, whether it's at our desk, in the car, on the couch, wherever it happens to be. And so we need to be intentional about getting ourselves up and moving and stretching and kind of just shaking our bodies, kind of helping to get it, just the blood flowing back in. There are definite deficits and negative impacts that it can have, not just on how our body feels, but like on our actual organs itself. Our heart is impacted, the blood circulation, even our long-term mental functioning is impacted when we're sitting too long. So we want to make sure that we're taking the time to do these things. So we're going to stand up again, and you're going to place your feet shoulder width apart. Slowly windmill your arms up high above your head, and then keep them up there. Reach to the sky. Feel that stretch on both sides of your body. With your arms raised, take a few deep breaths. As you inhale, imagine bringing joyful light into your body. On the exhale, imagine releasing tiredness, aching, and negativity. With each breath, imagine filling the emptied space with joyful light. And visualize packing it into microscopic spaces between your cells. You can lower your arms on the next exhale, maintaining awareness of your arms all the way down until they hang loosely at your sides. And then finally, we're going to shake our body section by section. Begin by shaking the left leg, then the right, the left arm, and the right arm. Shake and twist your torso, and end with a gentle head jiggle. Take note of how you're feeling and start back with your day.
Here's some really great quotes about building relationships. They may forget what you said, but they will never forget how you make them feel. Building
So
and
it's one of my favorites.
yeah, it's great. Building and repairing relationships are long-term investments. No significant learning can occur without a significant relationship. If you think back to some of your favorite educators that you had growing up or in college, you will probably think about people with whom they built a relationship with you. They didn't just teach you. So that's really, I think that's a really key part too. And then a great relationship, this is between anybody, is about two things. First, finding our similarities, and second, respecting the differences. And I think it's really important as educators that we do find out the similarities of our students, but we also respect all of the differences. We will have students from different walks of life, from different backgrounds than ours, and we just need to respect all of them and all of their differences. Their differences make them who they are, and the world is a very diverse place. So we need to make sure that when we are building relationships, we are not discounting the differences or ignoring the differences. I've heard people say, things like, well, I just don't see any of those differences. Well, that's not good. You need to see them and you need to respect them.
So as we mentioned earlier about those clear expectations, no matter the setting, we want to be able to help students generalize these things in all of the different environments that they're in. And so thinking about that, those expectations that we have, and again, defining them, making sure that it's clear students know what those expectations are. Teach and model them, again, reviewing them, going over them as many times as needed, and often because we forget. We need that exposure. We need that repetition to be able to make sure that it sticks. Explain positive and negative consequences. The students should know, if I do this, this will happen. It should stay consistent. It shouldn't be, well, when Johnny does it, this happens. But when I do it, this happens. It needs to be consistent. They need to know what is going to happen. I know, I think even, excuse me, as adults, we feel better when we know.
Yes.
That helps to reduce anxiety just in general. When I know, if I miss that meeting, this is what's going to happen. It helps me feel better about what's taking place. Practice, practice, practice. You can do student generated scenarios. Those are super fun. Have the students come up with it, teach it to the class. They love doing those types of things. Again, that consistent and equitable reinforcement, that reteach, and always, always, always being clear. Very clear with the communication. Define all of the terms that are being used in the expectation so that there's just all of this certainty around what the students are supposed to do. That will make them feel less anxious. That helps to bring that physiological response down. They're not like wondering, am I safe, or wondering what's going to happen, and so I'm stuck in that fight or flight. They're able to actually calm down because they know what's expected of them.
So another really important thing that sometimes gets overlooked when we are talking about behaviors is increasing the rigor and relevance of our actual content. So a lot of times we tend to think that some students who are not doing the work in class, that they just can't do it, or we need to lower our expectations of the whole class to meet those students that aren't doing the work, or we need to, worse yet, and I've seen this, where we will have a student who literally can't do the work, and we put them over in the corner and we let them do nothing. Okay, that is a recipe for disaster. Not only are we not teaching, we're not fulfilling our commitment to our students, but we are asking for behaviors to occur when we are giving students a bunch of free time and letting them know that we don't think they can do anything. So we need to increase the rigor and relevance. So when students are bored, they're going to have more time for behaviors. You know, I mean, you're going to have more behaviors in passing periods. You're going to have more behaviors at recess. You're going to have more behaviors in those last 10 minutes of class when you finished up your lesson and you let the kids just do whatever, you know. So it's important to keep that in mind. And low expectations create feelings of failure and low self-esteem. You think they can't do it, so of course they can't. They think they can't do it. If the teacher says, man, you know, Donnie can't do it, then Donnie's going to be like, well, Mrs. Underdown says I can't do it, I guess I can't. And then teachers who maintain high expectations are often surprised because students meet them. The higher your expectations, the more surprised you're going to be in your class, I promise. And, you know, it is just human nature that we do the very minimum that we need to do for a lot of things that we're not super invested in. So if our job says that our hours are 10 to 6, you know, most of us are going to do 10 to 6. We're not going to come in early and we're not going to stay late. Overachievers exist, but they are super rare. We have this belief that overachievers are everywhere, or that, you know, just achieving isn't acceptable, but people do what the expectation is. So I can tell you, my oldest daughter, super smart, very gifted, but we had an expectation for her that she needed to get nothing lower than a B. Okay, nothing lower than a B forever, like from all of her classes, even her gifted classes, whatever. What she would do was she would figure out how many points she needed to just get that B. And we're talking a very gifted child here. She would figure out, okay, so, you know, I can miss that assignment and I'm still going to get the B. So I'm just saying, people are, no matter how smart they are, no matter how talented they are, no matter how, you know, how much they know, they will just meet the expectations. And if your expectations for your students are low, then they are just going to do the bare minimum. Most of them. There are always outliers, but most of them are just going to do the bare minimum to get by. So raise the expectations and you will be surprised. So what does rigor look like? It looks like a lot of different things. It looks like teachers providing positive reinforcement for students. You're providing the reinforcement and showing that you have confidence in their abilities. It's students that are fully engaged. They're engaged throughout class because you're expecting engagement. Students are given a number of different ways to demonstrate their course material. They may be given creativity and freedom to choose how they show that they've mastered a skill. For some, it may be an essay. For some, they may do an oral report. Some of them may do something one-on-one with you. But if you give them a number of ways and you give them the freedom and the creativity and you show that you believe they can do it, they will. Students demonstrate critical thinking skills and problem-solving skills. Teachers ask deeper, thought-provoking questions. So you're not just looking for a specific, you know, true or false or a one-word answer. You're looking for something deeper. You're asking deeper questions. You're asking them to go a little bit more into the material. And then, you know, they can share that through verbal communication. They can write it down and show you, or they could just share with a friend. So it's just giving them the confidence, you have confidence that they're going to make the right decisions, that they're going to go deeper into the material, and they're going to choose an appropriate way to share. And then students are comfortable and confident enough to ask questions when they don't understand. Because if you don't have high expectations for your students and you don't have confidence in your students, they're going to feel shame and they're not going to want to ask questions because they're going to think that you just think they're dumb or lazy. But if you show that you don't believe that and that questions have a place, they will feel comfortable and confident enough to ask questions and to get them answered. And teachers should encourage collaboration. Collaboration isn't cheating, folks. It is what we do in the workplace. We collaborate. If we don't know how to do something, or if we are really good in one area, but somebody we work with is really good in another area, we get together and we collaborate. Yes, sure, in the workplace, we're required to do independent work, but we're also required to work with others. And two heads are better than one. You know, so a lot of teachers are worried that collaboration and small group work is going to cause behavior problems, but it really is not. If you have policies in place, procedures in place, and you give your students the confidence to do the work. And then also you want to display work around the classroom. So you want the students to have a sense of belonging in your class, and good work goes up so everybody can see it. So academic rigor is more appropriately challenging work, depth of knowledge, so going a little bit deeper, challenging, but also motivating, because they're going to be solving problems, and it really feels good to have a problem and solve it yourself. Deeply understanding complex ideas, applying learning to new situations, so novel situations, complex thinking, and quality. Academic rigor is not, and this is where we find with a lot of gifted programs is a problem. It's not more work. It's not depth of work. It's not frustrating and overwhelming. It's not just one more thing to do. It's not scripted or algorithmic. It's not about the difficulty, and it's not about the quantity. And I know a lot of us, when we're trying to differentiate within the classroom, we do have those students that finish early, and we sometimes give them more work to do instead of looking at the things on the left. We look at some of those things on the right. So it's really important to kind of keep this in mind when you are differentiating, as well as just what academic rigor is in general. And then relevance is also really, really important. So it's not just the rigor, it's not just having high standards, but it's also making sure that what you're teaching is relevant to your students. Now, you have standards you have to meet. You have things that you have to get through in your curriculum. But it's really important to keep this in mind, that what you want to say and what they're interested in has just this tiny little crossover in the middle. And that's where your relevance is. So how can you increase relevance? One way is you can ask student interest, and not just some survey that you give at the beginning of the school year and you file away and you never look at again, but continually asking student interest, meeting the standards using high interest tasks and teaching strategies. So you're looking for ways to have a lot of engagement in your classroom. So maybe the topic is the high interest area, or maybe it is the task. Maybe your students really like to create games or make videos, and you use that as a way to meet your standards. And then consider using nonfiction texts. A lot of the research shows that students in of all ages, and I think even adults, really enjoy the nonfiction. So if you are teaching an ELA class, you do not have to choose Shakespeare. You do not have to, do those things all the time. Or if you do, you can partner it with a nonfiction text that has similar themes. So you can always do that. Google is free, and you can say, hey, we're going to be talking about, I don't know, whatever theme, maybe Romeo and Juliet. And then you can look for a true story that is an appropriate level of reading for your students, and you can give that out. Also, my son's school, they did a really cool thing where the children were allowed in their ELA class to pick what books they wanted to use. And so then those students got to work together. So let's say there's 5 or 6 choices of a book for a literature circle activity, and those students would be able to pick which book they wanted to read, and then they'd go over to that group. Now, they might have gone over to that group just because their friends were there, but somebody thought that was a good book to read, and then it built interest, because we don't have to keep doing things the way we've always done them. We can, really look at our students' interests. And they do say that, not to be general, but males generally like nonfiction texts more. And a lot of times we get more behaviors from our boys than we do from our other students. So or the behaviors are more overt, I should say. So just be sure that, you're keeping those students' interests in mind. If you have a large class of boys, they, just ask. I mean, whether you have girls, boys, or, whoever, just make sure that you're asking your students what they want to learn or what their interests are. And then you can build your curriculum around them, because the curriculum should be flexible and should change based on your students. So take a moment right now. You can pause the video and just think. If you are with a partner, you can share out with your partner. How will you increase rigor and relevance? If you're by yourself, you can write something down. I actually recommend writing it down anyway, even if you're going to share with a partner, because if you write it down, it's going to give you one more way to remember that you're going to do that in your class.
All right, we're going to move to our laugh
Laugh and
strategy.
last.
And that is the laughing meditation. So maybe you're finding yourself, when we think about that window of tolerance, again, if you're kind of getting into that if you're getting into that hypoarousal phase, we want to stay in that window of tolerance. And we find ourselves kind of getting out of it, we want to be able to do the strategies to be able to get ourselves back into it. And one of those strategies is a laughing meditation. And it is exactly what it sounds like. All we are going to do is laugh. And yes, because I have not said anything funny, it may be hard. And so you are going to fake it to start. So you are just going to start laughing, fake laughing completely. And they have found that even fake laughter has the same benefits as real laughter. And we all know, we've all heard it our entire life, that laughter is the best medicine. And so we're going to just spend some time laughing. And then Kimber will share with us actually how this strategy was used even in a different way, but also still very productive. So we're just going to laugh. So you can pause the video and just, spend 60 seconds or longer just laughing.
Okay, and another way, I hope that you guys had fun with that. Another way that it was used when I was in school, in my drama class, we used to do a lot of different meditations or breathing exercises. And one way we would do this specific thing was we would go he, ha, ha, over and over again, um, for at least a minute, sometimes longer. It will give you a lot of the same feelings as the laughter because of the breathing technique that goes into the he, ha, ha. And so if you want to do that over and over again, you may end up actually laughing, but it's also a good way if people are like, I don't want to fake laugh. You can do that. And it gives you a lot of the same exact feeling bodily and through the breathing.
So we're going to move to our last part about building relationships and community in our classrooms. We may all be different fish, but at this school, we are going to swim together. So building relationships. This is one strategy that you could use when we think about it. And I have to laugh as I'm sitting here presenting this because I have a dog on my right side and I have a cat laying on my left foot. So they're literally both here.
And I do as well, although they're not on my feet. My dog's over here and my cat's over here.
But we tend to exhibit traits of either dog or cat. I know people are like, are you a dog person or a cat person? We get asked these questions often. But sometimes we have these dog personality types and these cat personality types. So you can see here the different traits that follow each. So dogs tend to be more forgiving of errors. They value attention, responsive to praise, social, playful, expressive facial expressions. That is exactly my dog right now. It's amazing how they all tend to have those traits. And then you have the cat traits. They're a little bit more skeptical, observant. I'll stand back and see what's happening first. They warm up to others on their own terms. That's very important. Cats are very independent when it comes to that. They're loyal when trust is established. They kind of keep that neutral expression when around groups, and they're not as responsive to praise or overt positivity. You watch your dog and the tail shaking and stuff. Oh, who's a good boy? And they get so excited, and you can see that how they very much respond to that praise. But if you ever do that to your cat, they're not shaking their tail. They're not staring at you up on their hind legs, like, yes, yes, look at me. I'm a good boy.
They're looking
Cats
at you
don't do
like
that.
you're.
No, they've walked away
Yeah.
actually, probably already. So we're going to think about these traits and kind of figure out, what are we more of? Are we more of a dog or are we more of a cat? And thanks to that, what cartoon, Cat Dog, right? It's a cat dog.
Yes, cat dog.
Maybe we're a little bit of both, and that's okay too. So going into those dog personalities a little bit more as a teacher, thinking about our students who might have more of those dog personalities, we want to provide opportunities for dogs to model, demonstrate, or share whole group whenever possible. Think quality of positive interactions over quantity, such as longer positive conversations one-on-one. Ask them questions to give them a chance to share about their world, their interests, their expertise. They love that attention. If behavior needs to be managed, opt for one-on-one pre-briefing or after class conversations. These are not the types where you want to be doing this in front of everybody else. Now the cats, thinking about the cat personalities, we want to give quick, low-key compliments. Don't linger for a response. I think about my cat and it's like the petting and like he licks long enough to then bite me if it gets too long, so it's quick. We don't want those long lingering moments. Ask him or her for their thoughts in one-on-one situations. Use written or after class praise instead of public praise. Again, they're not looking for that, everybody look at me type of thing. They're much more private individuals. Think quantity of positive interactions over quality, but space those out over time. And be particularly attentive and curious when a cat does approach you or open up. And just as it's a major surprise when my cat's like, hey, I want to sit on your lap and hang out, Think about that with your students too. Okay. You've done something right when that moment's taking place.
So think now how you will build relationships with your classroom this year. Just kind of take a moment, pause the video, perhaps write it down. Writing it down is going to give you something to look back on and remind you of, of what you intend to do to build relationships. And if you're mid year, you can still build relationships. It's never too late. It could be 2 weeks before school ends and you can still do it.
And the last nugget we wanted to leave you with is this video here. And in this video, Kimber can kind of describe how it was utilized at her school. We can kind of give you a little bit of background and stuff about the video, and we'll share the link so that you can watch it on your own. But basically in this video, there's a tree that has fallen, and everybody kind of just stops. Like the traffic stops, the whole town is just kind of not able to move forward. And it starts to rain and everybody's just kind of like frustrated and upset and so forth. But there's this little boy who he goes up to the tree and he decides he's going to move this tree. He's going to get it out of the way so that, life can function and move on and stuff and move forward. And he starts to push the tree. Now, obviously, it's this huge tree. He can't make that happen on his own. But just him taking that initial start of doing something, of action, causes other people to see it. And it's like, well, I can't let this little kid, do this by himself. And they all start coming over to help. And it starts with his peers. It's kids that start coming over first, and then you start to see the adults. And eventually enough people come that they are able to lift this tree, this massive tree, and move it out of the way so that life can continue to go on. And it was really, it's kind of a silent video. Actually, there's really no sound or anything to it. So there's no conversation spoken, but just our ability of being able to work together and how much we can accomplish.
And the way we used it at my school was that a lot of people think if it's not coming down from administration, we can't do it. We really need, a lot of people really have that focus that it has to be top down. Everything that we do in our classrooms or every initiative that we start needs to come from admin, and that's not the case. And that is what this video was used to show our teachers, that they could be the change for the school, and that once you see somebody starting to do something and having a little success, or even just trying, because he wasn't really having any success, he was just trying, then you can all start to work together. And it doesn't have to be some big top-down initiative from the superintendent. That it doesn't matter if you are, a 6-year-old kid, even the students can bring in power to the school. And so I thought that was it's a really lovely video, and you might want to share it with other teachers or even with your classes and have them tell you what they think it means, because there's lots of interpretation for it.
And it's short too. It's under 3 minutes, so it's not a very long video at all. So it's worth taking the time to watch it and get inspired. But it kind of reminds me, Kimber, as you were talking about how it doesn't have to be that top-down initiative, how very much like you were saying, we tend to do the bare minimum.
Yes.
And so if I'm not being told that I have to do it, I'm probably not even thinking about some initiative to make change. But we want to definitely think about our students, think about the needs that there are in the classroom and what we can do to maybe change and help make those met.
Yes, and also the more creative you can be in your classroom, the happier you're going to be overall, as a human, as a teacher. And so it's really important that we know that we have the ability to be proactive, we have the ability to make change, and you have the agency, I guess.
And that is all for our presentation. Thank you so much for watching.